The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So, good evening or hello, wherever you are listening from in the world today, and welcome. This is Roma Gaster and my colleague Sarah Cornelli, whom I'll introduce in a moment. And I'd like to warmly welcome you to the 2014 webinar series, which we're actually calling Deep Dive Around the Circle. And the first dimension that we'll be focusing on this evening will be the complying dimension of the circle. And I was thinking about it earlier today in relation to some key frames for this entire webinar series, and thought about it in relation to awareness and raising our awareness, whether we're working together with each other as coaches and consultants, and as we are serving and working with our leaders, is to assist us in becoming more choiceful in both relation to our leadership effectiveness and in terms of results and relationships, so that business performance, at the end of the day, the leadership circle has actually been designed to, and purposely designed to, assist leaders in dealing with and managing and navigating the complexity of the 21st century. So we've designed this series in order to be able to help you get clearer on helping your clients, your leaders, get clear on what really works for them, what really serves them, and what doesn't. And, you know, in this series, we're going to be focusing on the gifts and the strengths of the dimensions, together with some of the strategies for managing the default patterns and the habits and behaviors. And I'd like to introduce Sarah Cornelli to you. Many of you will have done some of your certification with Sarah. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you, Roma.
And we sort of covered off the protocols already this evening, and as I mentioned earlier, we will actually be making some time for questions, and towards the end of this we'll have more time for questions, and we'll also remind you of the next webinar and the webinar date. So Sarah, should we get started?
Sounds like a good idea to me.
Fabulous. Okay, just a quick reminder that in relation to the wedges and the dimensions that exist in the leadership circle, that we have two profiles, the leadership circle profile and the manager edition. And Sarah, I know that you wanted to say a couple of things about some distinctions between the two.
Yeah. So particularly just to be aware of the differences in the reactive part of the profile. So in the leadership circle profile, we have the full suite, if you like, of the reactive tendencies. So in complying, we have 4. In protecting, we have 3. And in controlling, we have 4. And those you'll be familiar with. And then in the manager edition, there's a slight variation. So there's just 3 in the complying. So the conservative comes out, and we have pleasing, belonging, and passive. And then in the protecting, the 3 remain the same: distant, critical, and arrogant. And then in the controlling, you'll notice that the driven has been taken out. And those, in the revisions, the questions have been adjusted to make sure that those aspects are included, but they're within another category. And you'll remember or you might remember in certification, that there's a relationship between the two categories. That's where that has been taken care of in the profile. So the patterns will be the same. It's the way in which the profile is constructed is preservation of the patterns. Is there anything else, Roma, you think worthwhile?
Oh, no, thank you for saying that, because essentially what we're talking about here is the structure and the framework and the underlying structure of both the LE and the manager edition. the correlations to leadership effectiveness and performance are still the same. And speaking of structure, in the leadership circle, one of the foundations that we talk about, and one of the foundations of this entire webinar series, is that structure determines performance. And you know, we say, okay, what does that actually mean? Sarah and I were speaking about it the other night, and we're saying that, you know, a belief is a structure. Our assumptions are a structure. Our mental models, our operating system, our internal operating system is a structure. The stories we tell ourselves, just like this image that's in this visual here, that there are visible structures that can support us and our leaders in the world in which they work. But there are also, and as we well know, the underpinnings of the leadership circle are to actually help us get in underneath what are the underlying structures. And it depends on the perspective we take. We can all be guilty of focusing our attention through a very narrow set of lenses. So we can actually miss some of what's going on around us. And in relation to the leadership circle, the structure that we'll be focusing on, as you well know, whether it's the leadership circle profile, or it's the manager edition, or indeed if it is the leadership culture survey, the creative competencies lie in the creative half of the circle. And this structure has been well researched in terms of key competencies and the essential behaviors and skills that are required for effective leadership and enduring business outcomes. The reactive tendencies are a structure which have enormous gifts and enormous strengths, and we will focus on some of those this evening. And we also need to be aware of when we overextend and underutilize some of the competencies, that it can actually normally be traced to some form of, you know, self-limiting assumption, and that's what we're going to look at, our habits and our thoughts and patterns of behavior. So in the leadership circle profile, we've got the 18 creative competencies and the 11 reactive styles. And as you know, we've got the 8 inner circle dimensions. And in the leadership circle profile manager edition, we have 12 creative competencies, 9 reactive styles, and 6 inner circle dimensions. And as we know, we also, underpinning the leadership circle is this structure in terms of adult stages of development, which is one of the key frames for understanding how we learn and grow, and how that changes over time. Sarah, did you want to say anything about the structure that in terms of the adult stages of development?
Well, I think just simply to remember that we don't go in a stage like, you know, now we've arrived, now we've arrived, now we've arrived. It's more that we move through these, and where is our center of gravity? And our center of gravity might be different in different contexts. And of course, what the profile is doing is helping us know where are we in this context in which the profile's been taken in regard to the reactive and the creative, and it touches on egocentric and touches into the integral. So we can also see where we might be in relation to those as well.
Beautiful. And of course, in terms of leadership development, as many of us know when working with our clients, that most work involving leadership development focuses on competencies and behaviors and skills, which is the outer journey, you know, the actions that we take, and the actions that is necessary for leaders in order for them to become more effective is what we're focusing on here, and focusing on not only the outer journey, but also the inner journey, which we call the internal operating system of performance. So in other words, the consciousness and the structure that allows us to become more effective in the context. So in other words, the context, when we're more effective, we are aware of the context, and the context informs us, and we become choiceful when our operating system is, when we're conscious of what once used to govern us and manage us, it now becomes an object of our reflection. And that's the purpose of us looking, first of all, in this webinar series at the underlying structure of the leadership circle, the reactive tendencies and styles, which, as you well know, consists of the complying, the protecting, and the controlling. And this evening, we are actually going to be focusing in on these primary, well, the primary coping strategies, where we have complying. Next webinar, we'll be working on the controlling, and the following one on the protecting. And as you be well aware that the work of Karen Horney, we talk about the moving towards movement, the moving against movement, and the moving away from movement. And I know, Sarah, you wanted to say a few things about Karen Horney and the underlying.
Yeah, I think the key thing for us to remember with Karen Horney's work is the recognition that we have all of these. It's a part of our natural way of seeking to cope with situations where we need to get our needs met, and for whatever reason they're not being met. So complying is the first place we start. If it fails, we go to controlling. If that fails, we go to protecting. And we can, if we're willing to really slow down and become aware, notice those tendencies. All of those tendencies exist in us. What happens over time is it's almost like we create our own dance of the way we move from one to the other. And different situations have taught us different dances. And so part of coming to understand the reactive tendencies is the way in which we deploy them, and in what contexts do we use them, in what sequence. Is there anything else you wanted, Roma?
I was actually doing just a little bit of preparation and a bit of reading for this, and one of the things that struck me that Karen Horney talked about is that, yes, we all, regardless of culture, we all have the capacity to do all of these, and that in actual fact, when we are not under pressure, when the anxiety and the tension and the fear is not running us, that in a healthy way, we have the capacity to be completely choiceful. And of course, that actually fits in beautifully with the overall philosophy and the design framework of the leadership circle, and that is, it's a strength-based model. And so we will be focusing on those as much as actually understanding when our structure doesn't work for us. And so we would like to initially focus in on where the structure is actually, where we have a tendency to get in our own way, in a sense, and where leaders that you will work with will have a tendency to also get in their own way. So this evening I want to focus on conservative, pleasing, belonging, and passive. And the key things we'll focus on before we get to the strengths and the gifts and some of the coaching strategies, many of you will be familiar with this, and we will open it up to have some thoughts and to have some, feedback from you and some of your comments and insights. But tonight, we're going to start off with what are some of the underlying needs of the complying tendencies when we're moving towards, in order to feel safe and secure and worthwhile. What's the mindset when we are overusing the complying? What's the physiology? And I'm going to invite you into feeling some of this from a somatic perspective. What's the felt sense in the body, the emotions, some of the voice, the tonality, the language we tend to use, the behaviors that you actually can readily see? What are the intentions here? What's at risk when our complying tendencies are dialed up or we're overusing them? And what are some of the underlying beliefs and assumptions? So let's start with underlying needs. And Sarah, I might hand over to you in order for you to work us through this. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. So if we look at the complying structure, and we, as you see here, it looks first in that orientation of likable, acceptable, cautious, and submissive. So those are the, if we were to look at it, those are the sorts of things that we would see. But if we look at what's actually underlying all of that, and thinking about what's the relationship that we have, it's I need people to care for me. I need people to want me, to accept me. So we can start to hear this vulnerability, this sense of I don't have all of the resources in me. I need to look outside of me to get the resources that I need for me. And so this great sensitivity, and I think it says it down the bottom there, the identification with the part of us that is helpless, and in that helplessness can become hopeless. And so my worth is based on meeting the needs of others so that they will care for me, want me, and accept me. The interesting thing is with this, though, often when I want this from others, there's an image I have inside of myself of what will meet my need. And of course, somebody who's not me doesn't necessarily know what that need is. And I'm not showing up in a way that reveals that need. It's not clear that that's what my need is. And so people can even try to get it right, but they never quite get it right, because part of it is the need that isn't going to be met. And so you can start to get a sense of the compulsive quality of it, rather than the choiceful quality, which is when it's strength-based. So I think it's helpful if you can get into contact with that part of yourself, or the moments that you recognize when you go into a needy space. And that always helps us understand what this aspect of the reactive tendencies is actually like. And the more we can get a felt sense of what it's like, the better we can meet people and coach people when this is present or active in their profile. Is there anything you'd like to add, Roma?
Well, I think that's a nice segue into, that the underlying mindset in the complying structure, which is actually not dissimilar to controlling and or protecting. And the mindset is one of scarcity and mistrust, that something bad will happen to me. So what we end up, what as Larry Wilson talked about, is we play not to lose, and often non-consciously, because there's this sense of I'm not safe here. And so for us to recognize those moments, and I'm going to invite you to think about the time, the most recent time when you felt, that that there was a sense of helplessness or hopelessness, or that your effort didn't make a difference or your voice didn't count. And to notice the mindset that actually governs how we show up on the outside. And of course, what we're talking here about is the internal structure, which has a physiological, body posture and non-verbals associated with this. And Sarah and I had a great dialogue around, how when somebody who is high in complying for whatever reason at that moment in time, and often, we've just, been run 4 certifications in the last month, and noticing when people come in and their body posture or their non-verbals tend to be a bit shrunken, or they they want to make themselves less visible in the room. the physiology and the body postures can show up in different ways when it comes to complying. And we're actually going to open up in a moment and ask for some thoughts and some ideas. And you can see here, it's shrunken, less visible, leaning forward. Sometimes the head tilts. Sarah, you want to take over and talk about some of the other body postures that you see and the non-verbals?
Yeah, this not taking up any space, and that's fascinating to me, because often when people are looking, they come to coaching for executive presence, and you can see that they actually contract within their own space, and you can see this in the way in which they enter a space. It's they don't take up much space. They can have this kind of facial expression, which you can't read what's behind it. It looks warm, it looks friendly, but you can't actually get a contact with it, because the person is in some ways not wanting to make too strong a contact. You'll be familiar with the ingratiating smile that you sometimes see, and it's sometimes like somebody is being endearing. So there's a felt sense that they're wanting something from you rather than they're giving something to you. Eyes averting or downcast, or even popped wide open, so you get that kind of Disney look, I would call it. So there's a kind of wide-eyed innocence, but there's not contact with that. Do you want me to go through more, Roma, or would you like to pick up from?
What I'd like to do is I'd like to ask if are there any comments and thoughts and insights that anybody would like to share at this moment in time. And if you would like to, please feel free to put up your hand so that we can open up the line and gain some insights from anybody that's actually on the webinar this evening. Karen has her hand up, Pauline. Would you be able to unmute Karen for me? Hi, Karen.
Hello. Hi, Roman. An example just comes to mind. I'm working with a female in a professional service firm, and her confidence has been really shaken and rocked. She thought that she was safe and had a visible presence in the organisation and was a bit of a star performer, but recently she'd been given the news that she dropped the ball. So she came to mind because her comment about herself was that she felt invisible. And I think in some ways, looking at this profile here, she has been, she's very externally focused, pleasing others, spends a lot of time investing in caring for others in the team, but has really negated a lot of her own needs. And her comment was that she really felt invisible, and the Harry Potter analogy came to mind. So we're doing some things there in regard to that, but that really resonated with me. That invisibility, not wanting to take up space, being very focused on others' needs and negating your own.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Karen. That's great. Anybody else? Okay, we'll keep going for now, and then we will come back and we'll keep going in relation to the felt sense. So this is the internal felt sense, and I certainly know that with the leaders that I've worked with, where that complying is the dimension that they're choosing to work on, and I will give another case study, case example a little bit later on. That internally there is this feeling of discomfort, some form of unease or anxiety, and often a nervousness that can relate to a hyper alert, becoming hyper alert, and sometimes reading into things that are not necessarily there. So that internal sense of paranoia or feeling really fragile and vulnerable, and that exposure. And in many ways, that when I actually put myself into that situation, there have been times when I have felt in this way. It's that sense of, okay, if I make myself less visible here, then I'm not that much of a target. So then, because I'm feeling unsafe or ineffectual or overwhelmed, therefore that sense of wanting to disappear. And this is often how people will, when they're working with the high complying, and many of you have got leaders who you're working with who are in this space. And thank you for sharing, Karen, in relation to that. And of course, with that sense, that felt sense, comes the emotion. And Sarah and I are going to do a little bit of a dance this evening in relation to, one of us will say something and hopefully we'll pick up. And my invitation, Sarah, is to, weave your way in. And to talk about some of the emotional sense that goes with some of that internal felt sense.
Yeah, I think I was actually just having a conversation in my office early this morning about this. There's a situation where something hasn't quite gone as well as I would have liked it, and this sense of I didn't live up to the image of myself, and that producing this feeling of, if you like, embarrassment that I hadn't lived up to an image I had of myself. And I think sometimes, these emotions can actually be quite subtle. And certainly I experience that with clients, that when you're wanting to explore this area, to really start to help them with the language and help them with the modeling, that gets you in touch with how do we speak about these things. Yeah, so contacting those moments where you can actually start to become aware of what is that insecurity or what is that quality of emotion. And I think the last one is the kind of the strong one, is that there's a feeling of vulnerability. There's a feeling of being at risk. Yeah.
And along with that, in terms of the emotional senses, that how then many of you, again, would be familiar with, when in terms of tonality and the voice, the softness with which somebody who is high in complying, for whatever reason, the softness and often a gorgeous, gentle tone. I have noticed that sometimes the pitch can be higher than when we have other protecting tendencies, defensive mechanisms like controlling or protecting. With the complying, there can be a higher pitch, or sometimes that tendency for words and the voice, that throat constriction.
I think also, Roma, that velvet voice, that really soft velvet voice that's very deep but very soft. It's another version you see in men as well.
And also we talked about the seductive voice, that seductive voice. In a sense, it's like, if I'm seductive and if I'm attractive in some way, then the delusion is that I will stay safe and I'm secure and I'm worthwhile. Or the childlike voice, the little voice that, if I show up this way, then you'll really like me, or the sweetness kind of voice. We have a hand up. Miriam, you have your hand up. And Judy Walker has a hand up. So let's go with Miriam first. That was the hand that I saw come up first. Hi, Miriam.
Hi. I was just thinking that overly animated in the voice is also something I've noticed, you know, sort of like over enthusiastic, to cover, you know, embarrassment or to try to be liked and come across as positive. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is what we would love. Please, this is the invitation, is to, you know, what else have you noticed? Because these are just some thoughts and some ideas, but they're not necessarily, you know, exhausted here. So thank you, Miriam. Judy Walker.
Everybody. Yes, I'm just reflecting on the power of recognizing that how much of a friend my body is. I find myself constantly in facilitation or even in coaching sessions, noticing when I'm in my power and when I'm out of my power. And my sense is that when I'm in my power, my body just reflects that. I'm either standing or I'm sitting tall. My shoulders are back. I feel grounded. I feel centered. My voice projection is good. And if I'm not getting this right, or I'm into some sort of reaction, some sort of fear of, am I connecting here? That just brings up my need. I've got to be liked. I've got to be accepted. And my body just follows that. So I'm consciously being reminded myself, and when I'm co-facilitating with somebody, asking for feedback, let me know when my shoulders are slouched. Yeah, if my voice projection is gone, because I know that I am not present with what's happening in the room at that moment. I'm caught up in this need to be liked and accepted. So yeah,
And does that also reflect in your voice too, Judy?
Absolutely, Roma. Yes, I know that when I'm in my power, that I'm holding the room. But you know, my body slumps, my head lowers, my throat is constricted. So yes, I'm talking down to the floor rather than the back of the room and connecting with the participants in the room. So it's a great reminder for me. Stand
Great
tall.
awareness. Thank you.
I think what's lovely about what you're saying, Judy, is that you can use your body to lead you out of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Lovely.
Because I notice what's going on in my head. You know, if I'm in my head thinking about what are they thinking of me, well, then the body's slouched. But if I'm just connected with the group, doing what I do, doing it well, I'm not in that reactive mode. I'm not needing to be liked. I'm looking more for what's the purpose of what's happening here. It's very powerful.
Thank you both, Miriam and Judy, for sharing. And if I can remind you to put your hand down, so that if you want to put your hand up again, then we know. So thank you. That's fabulous, both of you. And of course, with the voice comes the language. And in certification, we learn, you know, that some of the lead-in words are I must, I should, I have to, with the inferences that something bad will happen, and it will happen to me. So the language patterns that I often look out for and listen for are, you know, the wording. I'll try, I will try, or maybe, or possibly. That's possibly, or well, sort of, or not sure. It could be this, or it could be that. That sense of non-committal and or placating language patterns that are often an insight into the meaning making, and underneath that, some of the beliefs and assumptions. And of course, with the language patterns and what Judy's talking about, the whole body posture, etc., comes some of the behaviors. And Sarah, I'll invite you to, you know, have some insight, some input into this as well.
Yeah, so the behaviors really are about, of course, how do I stay safe? So you can see here what are some of the classic ways that I'm going to stay safe. So the sorts of things that would put me at risk are there in that top list there. Breaking the rules, which relates, of course, to the conservative. Being disliked or rejected, so being excluded in some way, or losing other people as a resource for me to help me. So actually not very much avoiding no. And we can hear that in the language that Rome was just sharing, that maybe, possibly, I'll try. What's actually behind that is that what sort of safety is at play? So not wanting to get that definitive position or challenge. So this not being able to speak up, not being able to challenge, not being able to get the voice of the person into the situation. And often, as we know, there's a lot of people with a complying tendency who often have a lot of insight or wisdom or perspective, but if they can't bring their voice because it feels so risky to bring their voice forward, then we don't get the value. We don't actually get the gifts that they have. So this avoidance of conflict or disharmony, because the fear is if I break relationship, then I don't have this person as a resource. Anything that would cause discomfort. So you can see this very much seeking the connection and maintaining the connection and making sure that the connection is not put at risk in any way. And I think there's what's lovely about this list here, seeking relief from symptoms of discomfort or worry. This is how do I then start to lean into, if you like, the strengths of complying and overdo it. So I don't see that I'm overdoing it. I don't see that this is there for me in terms of how do I keep myself safe. And it's very much often, in my experience, it's the rationalization that I might have for doing what I'm doing. So valuing very highly being loyal, being somebody who doesn't rock the boat, somebody who's kind and gentle, and often that's the strong identification with being kind and gentle and loving and giving. And so the idea is if I did something different from this, then I wouldn't be these things. So you can see that taking care of others, fussing over others. On the outside looking like putting others first, but at some level it's also about taking care of ourselves. And of course, being on the receiving end of this feels quite different from being on the giving end of this. So the others there being subservient, unquestioning, quiet. And the other one, which we often see with passive, is actually being immovable. So it's like water off a duck's back, being solid as a rock. Of course, also then often talking about those things where it's safe to talk about it, and it's like the resentment or the anger that actually can build up when a complying person is going through these experiences, looking for a place to vent that, so they can actually be manipulative and have no awareness of that manipulative tendency, because they can't afford to actually see that that's what it is. So those are some of the ways in which it expresses itself in behaviours.
Thanks, Sarah. And I know that we've had, I know that there's somebody who does want to ask a question. So, and I will just a quick reminder that in the GoToWebinar control panel, which is actually at the top right-hand part of your screen, if it has collapsed, then I encourage you to press the orange arrow, which is just to the side of the control panel. You'll just see an orange arrow. Either it's facing to the right, which means that the control panel is showing, or it's facing to the left, which means it's collapsed. And if you press that arrow, you will then see that there are some options and that there is a hand, a little hand icon, which is close to where it says names. It's the second one to the left from that. And that's how you put up your hand. so that we know, or alternatively, you can actually ask questions. There's a question panel down below, and you can ask questions as well, and Pauline can direct those to us. So we'll keep going. There's not that, before we get into some of the coaching strategies and some of the gifts and the strengths, there's just a couple of other areas in relation to the intentions. And ultimately inside is the intention to create safe relationships and to stay safe in relationships. And whilst on the outside it may look like that I am here to work with you and to, help you and to assist you, and of course the intention is there, underneath, in reality, the focus is really on me. And whilst it looks like it's on the other, and I tell myself that it's about the other, but ultimately underneath it is that, how do I stay safe here? And I also have extensive evidence that, all my intentions are towards the other and not towards me. And yet underneath this, there's this, and this is a recipe, and I often have this conversation, and initially it may come as a little bit of a shock when I can help people understand that the more I give at my own expense, and I'm doing this because the belief and the assumption is that I will stay safe in this environment and in this relationship, that the more I give and the more I don't get back, and remember, most of the time, if it's really high or dialed up, I'm not going to ask for my needs to be met. I somehow expect that if I show you love and I give you love and I give, then it will come back. And when it doesn't, this can be a case for resentment. And it's, of course, it's hugely compulsive. And I can't afford to see the truth about the fact that I'm actually creating this and I'm causing this, because if I do, that will tear me apart. And despite, it's like the gravity stick in the certification program. It's like when we work with clients and organizations, we are clear, leadership teams and organizations, boards, teams themselves within business units get clear on what their vision and their purpose and their strategy is. They get clear on their intent, and yet they are showing up opposite to what they intend. They're contrary, their behaviors are contrary to what they intend. And that's where what's at risk. That's where we can actually, this is the opening, when we do find people are starting to live into this discomfort. And of course, ultimately underneath this, when we do the what's at risk, or we ask the questions to get in underneath the beliefs and the assumptions, and what's really driving the show is that they will find out. They'll find out that I actually, underneath this love mask, is this individual who has actually given so much, and now I'm not getting anything back, and I'm actually turning into not that nice a person. Or that they may find out that I'm so needy here that I won't, that they'll reject me, or I'm not okay, and I'm not enough. And as a result of that, they won't love me, I won't be accepted, and I'm not good enough to have my needs met, which is very painful. Sarah, anything else you want to add there?
I think, what's so important with all of them when we do the what's at risk is to be with the person, because as we discover this, usually we're very lonely when these beliefs come into play. It's actually in our aloneness, in our isolation, and in our trying to get our needs met and failing, that these beliefs come into play. So it's so important to be with a person and connect with a person so that they have a companion with them as they reconnect with these things. And even that is a different experience from when the belief started to form. So just the potency of being with them as they discover this is a very powerful beginning to having a new relationship with this.
Thank you. And I noticed that there's some input from Christine Ture. Thank you, Christine. And Christine saying, I have found some people with the strong tendency for complying constantly seek positive feedback or affirmation, either verbally, informally, formally, or via visual cues. Without confirmation and conversation, the voice becomes staccato as self-doubt and fear set in. Is this what others observe? So it's an invitation. Okay. We'll just unmute you. Are you unmuted now, Arlene? Pauline, could you unmute Arlene?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted really to go back to the section you had within the language, because I've often found with people who are complying that they utilize the words I guess, or I guess that's so, as well as the words that you had on your slide. And I think one of the ways that they seek to have that need met is that they're frequently raising reasons for why it can't actually happen to them, because they're giving so much to others and are giving so much to often to their organizations as well. So they may use that term, well, I guess that's what I was attempting to do. I guess that's why this happened to me and why this is going on in my work life.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Kerem, I saw that you had your hand up before. Did you want to still give some input, Kerem? Hello, are you there, Kerem?
Can you? Yes, you can hear me. Sorry.
Yep.
Yes, I was going to say two things. First of all, the question about seeking positive feedback. Yes, I think we find that all the time, particularly during leadership development work. Individuals and teams constantly are looking for what we believe about how they're going, and sometimes are very disappointed and can act out if they don't get that. So that was one thing. But the other thing I was noticing was just as we go through this, you know, the complying that still remains in me, I find just what you're saying echoes a lot of my own experience when I'm in complying state, and just wanted to make that present rather than keep referring to they.
Today, yes. When this is alive and well in each of us. Yeah.
Yeah. I also have a question.
Thank you, Kerem.
I also have a question, if
Yes.
I may. I'm reflecting on the behaviors, and one behavior that seemed to be missing, which I think can also equally describe at times protecting, but is the tendency to try to physically disappear as well, get out of the situation, as opposed to trying to conciliate or please others. I find it's often trying to get out of the situation, so you'll have somebody in front of you agreeing to everything you say when they may not truly believe it or even understand or hear you, but there's a desire to get out the door fast.
And that might be, and I think that's an interesting, if you start looking at the dance that Karen Hornes talks about, that might be the distance coming in as a strategy to overcome when my complying strategy isn't making me safe. So then we go, how do we actually physically withdraw? And that would be a distancing thing. So we try emotionally first, but if that doesn't work, then we can recruit another reactive tendency to assist in that.
Thanks for the link, Sarah.
Beautiful. Thanks, Karen. So one of the, and leading into underlying beliefs. And again, thank you all of you for your comments, because what Sarah and I've put together here are just some thought starters and some of the experiences that we've had around how each of us personally, as well as the clients that we work with, can show up when the complying is the preferred strategy. Hello? And focusing on that I'm only worthwhile or safe or secure. If you go down this, you'll notice that this follows the conservative, pleasing, belonging, passive. If I follow the rules, and if I play it safe and I don't stand out or I don't rock the boat, I'm only safe and worthwhile and secure if others like me and accept me, and I'm seen to be nice and kind and good, even gentle and considerate. And I fit in and I go along to get along. And I meet the expectations of others and respect superiors, and I'm quiet. So, you know, and I know that many times that, you know, if I'm the good girl or the good boy, then ultimately my needs will get met, or I stay safe, or I stay secure in that sense. And just in terms of a case study, and this is a real life case study. So it's interesting, Karen, that you shared before that you've just currently working with somebody in professional services, and a couple of years ago I was working with a female who was in her mid to late 30s in the professional services, in a large professional services firm. She had been made, she was the youngest partner. She'd made it to partner and was the youngest in the firm to have made it to partner. And during the debrief, when I asked her about what the influences that might have shaped her, you know, in terms of patterns and habits and significant events and circumstances and people, she easily talked about her work environment and her academic achievements, and she easily reflected on her formative years and shared that, you know, her parents had encouraged both herself and her siblings to get really well educated and to stand on their own 2 feet. And it was almost like she told that story so easily, and the outer journey was accessible to her. And when we started looking at the debrief, it wasn't that she was shocked by it. It's that she was curious. She was actually curious to notice some of the elements, particularly around conservative and pleasing and high perfect, and a little bit of the driven score and critical in others, and was able to talk with me about that. And then suddenly she had this massive aha moment where she looked at her self score in the reactive, and she looked at the passive and the distant, and she said, I just remembered something, and it's actually almost 30 years ago that this happened to me. It was in school, and she was about 8 years old, and she was the bright, bubbly little one in school who always asked questions, who also always answered the questions. And one day the teacher called her up to the front of the class, and in front of all her classmates, the teacher slapped her across the face and said, "Don't you ever answer or ask another question again. You're nothing but disruptive." And remembering this event changed her awareness about how she had lived her life ever since that moment. I mean, you know, from that day onward, she went through school. She was the dux of the school. She went through university. She got a law degree, she got an honors in law degree, and she did all of that without ever asking or answering another question. So what she did in that moment is she became the good girl. And then she suddenly realized how that was reflecting in both her own self-assessment and how others were beginning to see her show up. Because at work, people were saying to her that they saw her as being the quiet achiever. They recognized her, her achievements and her career progress that she'd made, but she seldom spoke to anybody in a public forum, although she was very vocal in it, one-to-one. And until she recalled what had happened, she wasn't able to consciously manage that whole situation. She knew that people wanted her to speak up. People invited her to speak up, and yet she didn't quite understand that the subtle and unknown belief to her that good girls keep quiet was actually what was driving the show for her. When she suddenly understood that, with that awareness and with time and with practice, she began to find her voice in meetings and in public forums, and she started to get feedback and acknowledgement from that. And so she learned the benefit of silence, but silence in another way of being able to say, okay, here it is, I can feel it coming again, because what we did was we helped her get clear on what was the physiological anxiety associated with that event and how that had played out as a pattern throughout her whole life. And checking in with that, noticing it, feeling it, noticing the self-talk, taking a deep breath, physically shifting from where the pattern had actually connected with her, and then recognizing that in actual fact that her voice does count, and that people were asking her for her voice to count, and then that it was at that moment that then she could actually begin to understand that, this whole good girl story had, whilst it had kept her incredibly safe, it had actually stopped serving her. And her passion for making an ongoing contribution is now more alive and being more appreciated, because she is now managing it rather than it managing her. And in my personal experience, these deeper conversations with our clients normally don't happen unless, personally, I can only speak for myself, unless I'm willing to question my own stories and to explore their roots and how they impact my effectiveness. And I think that for me, as well as for many of us, that's life's work. And again, with the good girl story, and invite again, I'm aware that we've got about 25 minutes left of the webinar, and Sarah and I would like to move into some of the gifts and the strengths and some of the coaching strategies. But is there anybody that would like to share anything in relation to what we've covered so far? Sarah, how about I invite you to have share some of your experience and your wisdom around some of the coaching strategies?
Well, when you told me that story, I was just, I remember we were talking about, wow, and you can even see it in her creative profile. What things did she learn from having that reactive tendency? And my eye was drawn to how strong her personal learner is, how strong her mentoring and developing selfless leader and strategic focus is in achieving results. And I thought, wow, from that experience, she's got very, very resourceful about how to achieve all of those things. And looks like a whole lot of gifts were acquired even though, and I think that's the thing, sometimes we hear of these stories and we can get into the pain of the story, and rather than what has it activated, what sort of resourcefulness has it activated in us. And I think that that is the lead into that conversation about the strengths that come from these kinds of experiences that we have, you know, because it really has served us. I always get excited when I see a lot of shading in the reactive, because I think, wow, lots of resource. Because we learn things from having these tendencies that we wouldn't learn if we didn't have them. And so complying has lots of wonderful gifts, but until we can break this compulsive connection, the liabilities come along for a ride. And I think one of the things that I've had to work on this so much myself, is not actually judging what I've got, but seeing what I should treasure from having that tendency. You know, that the pleasing tendency or the belonging or any of them, what has that made me really good at as a result of having it? So, you know, my sensitivity to other people and all those sort of things, because I don't want to lose all of that. So really helping see that it's just the compulsive part, I must, I should, I have to, that is the limiting part. And we want to keep everything else. And this speaks to this point of accept it, to consciously experience it as something to be deeply grateful for, so that we can have a really positive, constructive relationship with that tendency. And I think that also, in my experience, certainly for me, when I did that, it opened my heart to it, and then I could actually work with it. Whereas when I was judging it and rejecting it, I was trying to run away from it, and therefore I couldn't work with it. So it was like trying to go to the creative without any resource base. So I think that's how can we help make a really constructive, heartfelt, positive connection with these tendencies.
Which, of course, beautifully leads into, you know, that in your experience and my experience, when we work with and we help people to understand. And I think, you know, we were both in the same certification when one of our Sydney certified users talked about, oh, now I get it. I've been seeing it as a weed that I need to exterminate and get rid of. And now I am beginning to appreciate it as a seed, which with nurturing, I can grow into the creative orientation. And that's therein lies the getting to know it and getting to let go of the compulsive side and to focus in on the gifts that it all brings. And this slide here is what we give out in certification. And so the next few slides are actually looking at, and if you go back to page 15 of your certification manual, that embedded in there is a page around how to claim the true gift. Let's look at the true gift in terms of conservative, because the gift here is this enormous loyalty and this fidelity to the organization's purpose and vision and values. I mean, this is rock solid. The champion of the values and the preserver of the heritage, that's the true gift here in the conservative. And that in terms of harvesting the shadow and balancing out the qualities and the skills is when we focus in on the gift of conservative, we have the capacity to challenge the status quo. It's almost paradoxical. It's almost counterintuitive that the preserver of the heritage, and yet at the same time challenging the status quo for the sake of improvement. and stretching myself and the organization into higher levels of performance, into looking for new opportunities rather than just accepting the status quo. And that's the shadow side. When we can embrace that, when we can actually shine a light on it, that's what's there and available to us all along. When the compulsion and the fear, when we can help and understand, when we're no longer fearful, that's how we can show up with the strengths and the gifts of conservative. And in terms of pleasing, Sarah?
Well, of course, you would offer that to me because it's such a good friend of mine. So this is actually, you know, with pleasing, there's a huge capacity for love. And how it really shows up is loving others. And of course, we've all experienced when it's overdone and it's too much. And then we can start to feel that there's some emptiness in the person themselves. So turning around, and you know, certainly this was work for me, and I can remember this, I had such a deep longing for my father to turn around and tell me that he loved me. And all my life he couldn't do that until just before he died. But it was like this hole in me, and I had this deep, deep longing that somebody outside of me would tell me that I was lovable. And it was only when I realized that I had this great capacity for loving, and what if I turned that capacity as a gift to offer to myself? So nobody could love me in the way that I wanted to be loved, because I was the only one who knew what I wanted to be loved. So this really seeing that for, you know, clearly for what it actually is. So this great capacity for love, but instead of projecting it all outwards, giving it inwards, so then there's more to give outwards, which is non-attached. It's the caring for caring's sake, caring out of a pure joy of caring, not out of caring out of needing, or loving out of needing, more that, you know, free, unencumbered love that of course is what all of us look for, unconditional love. So seeing this. And then with the shadow piece, it's actually seeing how you, in that compulsive aspect for loving, how you don't take care of yourself. And so then actually discovering some sort of personal resourcefulness. So earlier we talked about the helplessness and the hopelessness, actually shifting to find, and of course when you do start directing that love towards yourself, something fills up inside and you find the resourcefulness, and then you're in a place to be able to actually assert your true value rather than this compulsive, needy part of yourself. And so you can take a stand and be willing to be unpopular. In fact, you can do it from a much more heartfelt, and this can show up either as selfless leader or as community concern, or just simply courageous authenticity. How can I actually take a stand for what I believe will actually be in the highest good of all concerned? Or it's something that's in me that needs to be said, and people will do with it what they will, but it needs to be said. So in some ways, risking not being loved. And of course, when you're loving yourself, then of course it's no risk, because there's nothing to be lost in that.
Which of course is no mistake that belonging sits next to pleasing, and that part of claiming the shadow is that you know, this willingness to be alone, and actually to find that I do have my own independence, and that, you know, I can stand up and be a champion and direct others that are counter to, you know, the status quo. So, letting go of my attachment to belong and fit in the eyes of others, and actually finding that sense of center of gravity, which of course comes through claiming the gift in terms of amazing team focus and amazing team spirit and building of community and organizations and strong commitment to purpose. Well, my own profile was really interesting for me to actually get into this and to sidle up to it, because there was a potential shadow flag in mine where there's, by others' view, there's very little shading, and by my own view, it was like zero score. And of course, knowing that, claiming that, and harvesting the shadow part of it is actually recognizing that there is this sense of independence which has actually guided me and driven me all my life, and in some ways has kept me separate. That independence can now serve and join in with, so that independence becomes interdependence, which of course is then that move, the path of least resistance, into and through into the creative orientation, which we're about to come to in a second, but we will just cover off on the passive. And Sarah, I invite you to just work with the passive, and then we'll move into the near enemy concept and moving into meeting with them where they're at.
Of course, the beauty of the passive is the ability to be still and to wait and to not rush in where fools might rush in. So this this lovely steadiness and thoughtfulness and presence that can come from being passive. But of course, if that's overdone and it becomes compulsive, then it becomes moribund and immovable, as we were talking about before. But this is a tremendous like sift and sort kind of capacity with passive, and so once with the passive tendency, you can actually see what is the overdone aspects, and really leaning into understanding the impact that has on other people, and then connecting with what we're afraid of in the passive. Then it becomes, oh, we lost it, Roma.
I'm sorry. I thought you were doing a natural segue into the next one.
Yeah. So it's that ability then to come forward and actually move forward when forward movement is needed. So then you get the discernment that having that perspective gives, and then you can actually be very potent with that ability to hold until the right movement, and then the ability to move quite quickly. And of course, it's a great forerunner for composure. I see. Thanks, Roma.
Beautiful. So last few slides, folks. As you will remember, that one of the philosophies that underpins the way that we show up in the leadership circle is that is this beautiful, compassionate stance of meeting people where they're at, and to consider the questions. How is someone with high complying in their profile likely to show up? My experience is that there is often this sense of fear or anxiety, and a sense of really taking it to heart when they see that that becomes an ouch. And how can and for me personally, how can I best show up and support them in those moments, and what does it require of me to sit with and to not and to resist the temptation to fix or make right or change or whatever, is to help them reframe their relationship so that they can begin to lean into it. And Jennifer Garvey Berger talks a lot about leaning into the edges and leaning in and sidling up and getting to know it, and then leaning in further to be able to claim what's at the boundaries, and to one step at a time, one baby step at a time often. And as we know that in terms of complying, that high complying can often have an impact on empowered relating. That what we call reactive complying can impact in the near enemy concept, that we think that we're showing up with high relating and empowered relating and interdependent relating, whereas in actual fact what's underlying it is what we've covered in the webinar this evening. And when we are truly able to claim the gifts and to actually understand the impact that the complying, the reactive complying can have on our empowered relating. And when we can actually understand this, then the work is to use that, the gifts and the strengths, that natural. Robert Fritz talks about the path of least resistance. Let's make this movement in relation to what we're already gifted at and what we already have some strengths in. And as we talk about in the certification, this is where structure determines performance. We already have strong relationships. We already have gifts in relationships. We know how to work with people. And when we identify with the empowered form of relating, in other words, I find my voice in service of the team's vision, the team's purpose, the outcomes. I find my voice. I actually work in a safe environment in order to be able to claim the gifts and harvest the shadows. Then we start to see slowly and over time the angst starts to reduce, and then more of the empowering belief structure. And that's where we come in, that we can actually assist and work with and help them with the needs in order changing the story and the inner dialogue and some of the physiology that comes with it. Sarah, anything you'd like to say here?
I just think that it's important to be aware that this, I think, beautifully illustrates what can be the misunderstanding. So somebody has the complying tendency and imagines that that's showing up as more relating than it actually is. So helping to make that distinction or differentiation becomes really important in helping them understand how to shift that.
So that it becomes empowered relating. Yeah, beautiful. And I love this saying, is that nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. And this is what does go away is the angst that sits in underneath it when the reactive, when we can see the reactive, when it becomes an object of our reflection, whereas once we were subject to it, now we can see it for what it is, we can claim it, we can own it, and we can actually focus in on the gifts and harvest those and work towards managing the angst and the anxiety, because it will be there inevitably over time. So with that, Sarah, anything you would like to say? And then we have a few minutes to open up if there are any questions or comments or insights. We have about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll finish off with just giving you a reminder of the next webinar. And but before we do that, I'd love to hear from some of you.
Dean's got his hand up.
Dean's got his hand up. Hello, Dean. Pauline, would you mind unmuting Dean so that Dean could actually share his insights or his question with us, please?
He is unmuted, Roma.
Hi, Dean. We can't hear you. Are you talking yet?
Have you got your microphone open?
Dean, we can't hear you, so maybe you could perhaps, yes, ask a question. Can you see a question coming through, Pauline or Sarah, from Dean?
Yes, he says he'll type one through to us, Roma. So perhaps we'll go
it.
to the next one and then I'll let you know what it is.
Okay, great. Okay. So anybody else? Any thoughts, ideas, comments? Sarah, you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that I've discovered, the more I work with reactive tendencies, and certainly just for myself, is how subtle they can become. So it's like there's a level of seeing them which is kind of gross. Oh, right, slap in the face, that's obvious. And then over time, as I become aware of those, it becomes more and more subtle. And I must say that I find joy in now in tracking all the subtle ways in which these tendencies can show up. So they're not always, big and bold and in your face. They can be subtle. And I like that idea of practicing awareness, 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 awareness. And all these things will always be with us, and it's just being in that choiceful relationship with it. So we can see it and make a choice about how we respond to it.
So a question from Dean. Could we hear a little about how it manifests in culture surveys, e.g. is a culture of blaming others one way it might show up? Well, of course, we have that comply control dynamic that shows up both in ourselves but also in organizations. And my personal experience over years of doing culture surveys is that the high tendency for complying is often a direct manifestation of a high controlling or a high blame culture or a very highly critical culture. And that tendency to actually drive people into safety, and it's not worth putting my head up here. I certainly see it that way, Dean. And Sarah, I'm sure you have too, haven't you?
Yeah, actually, I'm working with a client at the moment that has a strong complying culture, and in that organization, there's kind of an unwritten rule that you don't speak badly of each other, even though you might want to rip their heads off. So you have those conversations in your little cliques about all the things that annoy you. But when you're together, you're all polite and nice and friendly and outwardly cooperative. But when it comes to implementation, you still go your own way and you do your own thing. So it has this, superficial appearance of niceness and cooperation with an undertone of independence and I'll do it my own way, thank you. And so that's certainly one of the ones that I'm working with right now.
Beautiful. Well, Sarah, thank you for partnering with myself and Pauline and Adele in putting this on, and we look forward to the next webinar, which actually will be on the 30th, Wednesday the 30th of April, and we will focus on controlling. Some of you have been asking about the slides from tonight's presentation, and I would be keen to interact with you in relation to those slides. So feel free to send us an email to Pauline and myself, and we can have a conversation with you about the slide deck. And in the meantime, we look forward to the next webinar. And if you have any comments or questions or anything else that we could say, improve on, change, please feel free to provide us with your comments. So, Sarah, anything you'd like to say to finish off?
Well, just anything, if anyone wants any support or help, just really happy to provide that. For me, the greatest way to learn this is to get to know it in yourself, and yeah, so learning with self and then sharing with others. And I would just recommend, if anyone loves reading and studying, that Karen Horney's book on our inner complex. I just would really encourage you to have a look at that too.
Beautiful. And thank you. It says Adele, but it's in actual fact it's Pauline who's with us this evening. So thank you for being with us this evening, Pauline, and everybody on the webinar this evening. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the connection next time on the 30th of April, if not before then. So with that, we will bid you good evening, good afternoon, and thank you.
Night, everybody.
Good night.